this problem has to do with the sign class, which we want to write. So let's go ahead and write the class declaration for it. So public class sign. And then inside of here, we're going to have our fields, our constructor, and our methods. So before we start talking about our fields, let's talk about the constructor a little bit. So the problem statement says the sign class constructor has two parameters. The first parameter is a string that contains the message to be displayed on the sign. The second parameter is an int that contains the width of each line of the sign. The width is the positive maximum number of characters that can be displayed on a single line of the sign. So this constructor is a little bit simple. All that's being passed in is the message and the width of the line. So the header of a constructor is going to be public, and then just the name of the class. And then, so we're being passed in the string message, and then we're also being passed in the width of each line, which is an int, int width. So all the time, your constructor will give you an indicator of what fields you might want within your class. What is the data that makes up a sign? What is the fundamental building blocks of a sign? Well, I would say that we would want a field that holds the message, and we would want a field that holds the width of each line. Okay, so if we wanted to convert that from pseudocode to real code, we would say private. The message is a string, so string and then message. And then we would do something similar for the width of each line, so private int width. Okay, so then as we continue writing our constructor, what we're going to want to do is we're going to take these fields that will have our internal data, and we're going to want to set them equal to these parameters that are being passed in when we create a new sign object. So the way that we can do this, since I named them exactly the same, you have to have some sort of differentiator between the two. So we can use the keyword this. So this.message equals message, and this.width equals width. If you didn't want to use the keyword this, unfortunately, writing something like this wouldn't work. So you might want to change the name of the field to like sign message or something like that, so that there's no conflicts with the naming. But I'm just going to go ahead and use this and have them be named the same thing. Okay, so that should be our fields in our constructor. Now we need to write these two methods. So sort of to back up a little bit, a sign has as many lines as necessary to display the entire message, and is split among the lines of the signs without regard to spaces or punctuation. Only the last line of the sign may contain fewer characters than the width indicated by the constructor parameter. One of the methods that we want to write is the numberOfLines method, which returns an int representing the number of lines needed to display the text on the sign. In the previous examples, numberOfLines would return 3, 2, and 1 respectively if the sign was shown in the table. So you can see, based on the width, the sign will need different numbers of lines. If we wanted to write the method header for this method, it's going to look like public. We're returning an int, right? This is going to return the number of lines, so we're going to have int as our return type, and then the name of it is numberOfLines. This doesn't accept any parameters, so we can go ahead and close those parentheses without passing anything in. If, say for example, the message fits perfectly, what we want to do is we just want to return the message length divided by the width. Okay, so this should make sense. So say for example, our width was 5 and our message length was 10. We would say that we could fit 5 characters on each line, and so then we could just take 10 divided by 5 to get 2 as our number of lines that we needed to display that message. But if the message doesn't fit perfectly, we want to return the message length divided by the width, and then that plus 1. The reason why is we're going to have a remainder of letters on the last line that we couldn't count by a simple division. So maybe this will make sense if I set up the if statements here. So how do we find remainders? So in that first situation I proposed where we had a message length of 10 and we had a width of 5, how do we know that 10 was divisible by 5? Well, we can use mod. So if we could say if message dot length mod width equals 0. So there's no remainder. What we can do is we can just return message.length divided by the width. So this is that 10 divided by 5, or 10 mod 5 is equal to 0. So we can just return 10 divided by 5, which is 2. Otherwise, if it doesn't fit perfectly, so this would be an else statement. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to return message.length divided by the width. Let me put this in the parentheses just to make sure. Plus 1. So we need to account for that last little line. So this is, for example, if, so this else case is if it doesn't fit perfectly. So let's say, for example, our message length was 11. And when we modded that with 5, we got that it equals 1. So it wouldn't go into the if statement. And then when we divide 11 by 5, what we're going to get is 2. Remember that integer division is a thing. But we cannot fit 11 letters in a sign that has only 2 lines of width 5. Okay, we're going to have that extra letter. And for that, we need to account for it. So what we do is we add one more line. That is our numberOfLines method. Next method we need to write is the getLines method. So what this does is it returns a string containing the message broken into lines separated by semicolons, or returns null if the message is the empty string. The constructor parameter that contains the message to be displayed will not include any semicolons. As an example, in the first row of the preceding table, getLines would return this string. No semicolons should appear at the end of the string returned by getLines. We can go ahead and write the method header for this getLines method. So public, we are going to be constructing a string within the method and then returning it. So we don't want to modify our internal state. We want to build up a new string. So we're going to return that string, public string, and then getLines. getLines. All right, and then let's go ahead and let's write some pseudocode so we can orient ourselves. So there's sort of like a base case for this, and it's that if the message length is 0, so it's an empty string, return null. Okay. Otherwise, what we want to do is we want to get started with our string that we're creating, that we're building up. So we can go ahead and create a new variable to keep track of the built up string. Next thing we're going to want to do is create another variable. This one is going to keep track of our place within the line. So we know that once we have reached the end of a line, we want to add a semicolon at the end. So as long as we're keeping track of what place we are in the line, once we get to the very last letter in the line, we can go ahead and add a semicolon and then move on to the next line and continue building up the string. Create a new variable to keep track of what letter in the line we are currently on. Okay, then what we're going to want to do is we're actually going to want to loop over each of the letters in the message. So as we're building up the string, we want to loop over every letter. We're going to want to deal with adding the semicolon first within the loop. The reason why is as soon as we make it to the end of the string, we do not want to add a semicolon there. So by adding it at the front, we can prevent that from happening. So if the count is equal to the width, what do we want to do? We want to add a semicolon. And we also want to reset the count back. Reset the count back to 0. Because at that point we would have moved on to another line. What else do we want to do in there? We want to add the letter at the current index. So we're adding that to that variable that we use to keep track of the built up string. And we also want to increment the letter count as soon as we're done with that. So we're keeping track of where we are in that line, and we're using that to figure out if we need to add the semicolon. And then last but not least, remember we're returning a string within this method, so we want to return the string. So let's go ahead and start writing the code. So if the message length is 0, return null. So what we can do there is we can just call if message length is equal to 0. So if it's that empty string, what we're going to do is just return null. That's our base condition. Then we're going to create a new variable, keep track of the built up string. So this should be a string. We can just call it maybe lines, and we're going to set it equal to an empty string. So next we want to create a variable, keep track of what letter in the line we currently are on. So we can start this one off at 0. And then we want to loop over each of the letters in the message. So for int I is equal to 0, I is less than message.length, I plus plus. What are we doing inside of this loop? We're doing a few things. So first of all, we need to check whether count is equal to the width. So if count is equal to the width, what does this mean? This means that we have reached the end of the line and we should add a semicolon. So lines plus equals semicolon. And then reset the count back to 0. So count is equal to 0. Okay. Next thing we want to do is add the letter at the current index. So we're using that lines variable to build up that string. So what we can do here is some string concatenation, and we can use the substring method to grab the letter at that current index. So message.substring, we're using I to keep track of what letter we are within the message. So if we just wanted to add the current letter that we're looking at, we would do substring I plus 1. And then we want to increment the letter count because we have moved on to the next letter within our message. So that's all of the logic within the for loop. Last thing we want to do within our method is to actually return the built up string. So we would be returning lines here. And that should be all it for our getLines method. And in general, that should be it for our sign class. So here's what it looks like if we get rid of all the pseudocode. And let's go ahead and test out all these sample method calls that we were given. It starts off with just declaring a string and an int. That's kind of not interesting. It doesn't have anything to do with the sign class, but I think they're just using that so that they can reassign those later on with method calls. So the first actual sign related statement is this, where they create this new sign, sign 1. So sign 1, ABC222DE in as the message, and they pass in 3 as the width. Okay, so let me go ahead and move this to our fields. So that just sort of sets up the internal data of this sign. So then they call numberOfLines. So we need to figure out whether the message goes evenly into the width of the lines. So what is our message length? It's 368 is 8 mod 3 equal to 0. Unfortunately, no, it is not. It's equal to 2, so we need to go into the else case. So what we do is we take the message divided by the width and then plus 1. So 8 divided by 3, integer division is going to be 2. Then we add 1 to it, so we get that the result of this numberOfLines method call is 3, and that matches up with what our return value is. Then it calls getLines. So is the message length 0? So is 8 equal to 0? No, it is not. So we do not return null. We create this lines string. So it's just an empty string right now. And we set our count equal to 0. Now we want to loop over every letter in our message. So we start off at 0 and we see if that's less than message.length, which is 8. Yeah, it is. So we check, is count equal to width? So is 0 equal to, what is our width? Our width is 3. It is not, so we do not add a semicolon. So then what we do is we just add the substring of 0, 1, which would end up having our line be A. And then we increment our count, so our count is now 1. We go ahead and increment our I, so now we have I is 1, is 1 equal to 3? No, it is not. We get the substring from 1 to 2, so that would be the letter B. So now this is what our string looks like. Increment our count again, so now we have count 2. Increment our I, 2. Is 2 equal to 3? No, it is not. We do not add a semicolon. We get the substring at 2, 3, which is the letter C. Now our count is 3. increment our I again, 3 is still less than 8. Is 3 equal to 3? Yes, it is. So what we do is we add a semicolon to our lines string that we're building up, which is good because we could only fit 3 letters on that first line, so this semicolon is separating the lines. So that is really good for us. So our count is going to go back to 0. Then we're going to find the substring from 3 to 4, which is the first 2, and then increment our count again, and then we're going to increment our I. Is 1 equal to 3? No, it is not. We substring from 4 to 5, which is another 2, increment our count, move increment our I again, so it's 5. Is 5 equal to, is 2 equal to 3? No, it is not. Substring from 5 to 6, which is another 2, or increment our count to 3. Move on to I equals 6. Is 3 equal to 3? Yes, it is. We add a semicolon and we set our count back to 0. Then we add the substring from 6 to 7, which is the D, and then we increment our count. We're on to our last letter. Is 1 equal to 3? No, it is not. We get the substring from 7 to 8, which is the E, and we increment our count. Now when we try to increment our I again, we're going to get that 8 is not less than 8. So what we're going to do is we're going to return lines, which is this string here. And this exactly matches up with our result. When we call getLines again, we're just going to get this exact same string. Nothing is going to change because we still have the same message length and we still have the same width. Okay. Next, we create a new sign that has the message ABCD and the width of 10. When we create that new sign, what we're doing is we're just setting this internal data. Then when we call numberOfLines, we check whether message.length mod width is equal to 0. So the message length is 4. Is 4 mod 10 equal to 0? No, it is not. It is 4. So we're going to go into the else case. So this is going to be 4 divided by 10. So that's actually 0, integer division. And then we add 1 to it. So we get that the number of lines that we're going to need for this sign is just 1, which matches up with our return value. When we call getLines, our message length is 4, which is not equal to 0, so we will not return null. We're going to start up our lines string again, and we're going to set our count equal to 0. We're going to start off at the first letter, which is less than message length. Our count is 0, which is not equal to the width, which is 4, so we're not going to add a semicolon. Then we're going to add the first letter to our lines, so that's going to be that A, and we're going to set our count to 1. Then we increment our I. We check whether 1 is equal to 4. No, it is not. We add the next substring, so substring 1, 2, so that's going to be that B. Increment our count again, increment our I. Is 2 equal to 4? No, it is not. We get the substring from 2, 3, which is the C. We increment our count again. We check whether 3 is less than 4. Yes, it is. Is 3 equal to 4? No, it is not. We get the substring from 3 to 4, which is the D, and we increment our count to 4. Now when we try to increment our I again, we're going to get that 4 is not less than 4, so we cannot do the for loop logic again. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to return the ABCD string as the lines. The next sign that we create is sign 3. It looks like it's ABCDEF, and the width is 6. So when we call numberOfLines for this one, we're going to check whether message.length, which is 6, mod 6 is equal to 0. Yes, it is. So now what we can do is we can just divide 6 by 6, and that goes into it perfectly just once. So we just need one line for this message. We go ahead and we call getLines. We check whether the length is equal to 0. So is 6 equal to 0? No, it is not. So we do not return null. We go ahead and we loop through from 0 to 6 exclusive. We check whether 0 is equal to the width, which is 6. No, it is not. Then we build up our string again. So to sort of speed this up a little bit, this is very similar to what we saw in the last sign 2, where we're just going to build up that string A, B, C, D, E, F. And since there's only one line in the sign, we're not going to have any semicolons within this string that we build up. Okay, so we can go ahead and just like skip this. And this next sign is interesting. It actually doesn't have a message. So it looks like it's just an empty string, and it says the width is 4. So when we go ahead and we call number of lines, what's going to happen is we're going to check whether message.length mod width is equal to 0. So is 0 mod 4 equal to 0? 0 divided by anything is going to be 0. So what's going to happen is we're just going to return the message length divided by the width. So we're going to get 0 divided by 4, which is just going to be 0. There is no text to display, so we don't actually need any lines for this, interestingly enough. Then when we call the getLines method, we are going to get that the message length, which is 0, because it's an empty string is equal to 0. So we're going to return null for the getLines method. All right, and then the last sign that we're creating, sign 5, A, B, C, D, E, F, has these underscores in it, and the width is 2. So it has a length of 8. So let's go ahead and see if 8 mod 2 is equal to 0. Looks like it is. 8 is divisible by 2 evenly. So what we're going to do is we're going to return 8 divided by 2, which is 4. We need 4 lines for this message. When we call the getLines method, we're going to check whether message.length is equal to 0. So 8 is not equal to 0, so we're not going to return null. And then we go ahead and we create the string lines. We set our count equal to 0, and we start at I equals 0, and we check whether that's less than message.length, which is 8. So I could run through this loop again. You hopefully get the idea. If you don't, feel free to comment down below and I can get back to you. But basically, since the width is 2, we're going to grab the first 2 characters, then we're going to append a semicolon because the count is going to be equal to the width, and then we're going to grab the next 2 characters, which is the underscore and the C, and then we're going to add another semicolon, and then grab the next 2 characters, D underscore, and then semicolon, and then the last 2 characters, which is E and F. And this is what we are going to return for getLines. And so once again, here is our sign class without any pseudocode. Hopefully this helps you out with this problem. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below and I'll get back to you. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.